Well, everyone, the PlayStation 5 is one of those consoles that came out about 5 years ago. So it's about turning 5 years old this year. And it was supposed to be the successor of the PlayStation 4, and it is the successor for sure. But this is one of those interesting types of consoles where the design is so nice, the power is so good. But the thing with this generation of consoles is that there's a lot of competition here. I truly do feel like with the PlayStation 5, it is a really good generation of a console, and it's definitely worth buying for sure. But there might be some reasons why you could even still wait to buy this console to kind of see what ends up happening in the future. Now, the thing with the PlayStation 5 is that when you take a look at this design and when you kind of rewind back to 2020, when this console originally came out, I was a massive fan of it. I love the way this console looks. And even now, almost 5 years later, this console still looks so good. I love the way the original PlayStation 5 looks. The design is really nice. Whether you get the disc model or the digital model, you are getting a very good looking type of console within both of these. And I think that's a really big and nice thing to keep in mind here. So with something like the PlayStation 5, when you take a look at the outside, it was this interesting type of design. I don't even know what you would call it, but it looked so good. Now the top plate, you had these plates that were pretty much removable. So that was always something really nice to do. You could just go through and kind of remove the plates around it. And that was kind of a nice thing going on there for sure. Just the design of this console still to this day and age looks beautiful. Now on the front side of this console, beyond than just the plates, you do have a set of ports. So you do have your USB Type-C port on the front side and a standard USB Type-A port. So this was really big, and this was a reason why I liked this console more than the Xbox Series X, or a feature I wish got ported over to the Xbox Series X. It was weird that those consoles never had any USB Type-C ports on them. The PlayStation 5 did end up having it right on the front side. That did, in a way, in my personal opinion, it did kind of future-proof this console in a way, because USB Type-C is so important. It's everything is USB-C. So it was weird that we weren't getting USB-C inside of this phone from that particular perspective. So that was always a really weird thing that ended up happening there. But luckily, the PlayStation 5 ended up having that type of capability. Now, like I said, this particular console came out in 2 different sizes, or 2 different models. You were either getting the disc model or the digital model. So it really just depends on which model you wanted to go for. In this case, like I said before, I got the digital and the disc model. I liked it both, but definitely the disc model might have been my preference. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. Now, on top of that, on the backside, you were getting your additional ports as well. You were getting 2 more USB ports. You're getting your HDMI port as well. And then you were also still going through and maintaining an HDMI port on the backside. So this was in and of itself another pretty cool thing, having that type of I/O once again. It is a really cool thing in and of itself. And if you're going to go ahead and, use this console had a really good amount of port selection for the most part. And once again, that in and of itself, it was a really nice thing going on for that type of console when it came down to it. So at least from the exterior, when I look at this console still holds up fairly well. Maybe it's not the best perfect console of all time, but I think it does look pretty good for the most part, at least from the exterior. Now, there are some other things to kind of keep in mind here too. Number one, there are successors to this console already. So we already have basically the PlayStation 5 Slim and the PlayStation 5 Pro. Those ones did end up coming out last year and maybe the year before that. So when you take a look at it from that perspective, you are basically getting a console at this point that might be a little bit, not outdated, but it might be just a little bit different situated when it kind of comes down to it. So what that basically means is that if you're going to go through and pick up this console, you're probably going to notice that this console is already kind of this last generation console, because we already have the successors of this console when it kind of comes down to it. So just kind of keep that in mind, but it's really not even the biggest deal of all time. Now, one of the biggest things to keep in mind here with the PlayStation 5 is the amount of games within this console. There is an endless amount of games that you can play here. Although it's not the biggest, best library of all time, this is still a fairly decent amount of library to have and be able to play inside of this type of console. So I do think that in and of itself is a very big thing to keep in mind, because you're going to be able to go through and pick up this type of console and have a massive library of games right inside of it, which I genuinely think is one of the most important things to kind of keep in mind when you're going through and kind of buying these games, and you're going to be able to use them because, you're going to have such a huge library of them. Also, on top of that, because you are basically going through and having different types of PlayStation 5s you can choose from, you can choose whether you want the disc model, the digital model, the slim model, the pro model, there are a lot of different models you can choose from of the PlayStation 5 nowadays as well. So I do think that kind of gives this a little bit of an edge too, just because you have so much capability when it comes down to it, to what type of PlayStation 5 you even want to go ahead and buy. So I've always liked that about the PlayStation 5s too. And I think once again, that in of itself is another really cool thing going on for this PlayStation 5. And to be honest, the PlayStation 5 controller is my go-to controller. Whenever I'm doing any gaming on my PC, or even like if I'm doing any, Android gaming or anything like that, I almost always go ahead and pick up my PlayStation 5 controller first because it just works the best. It just works the best for me. And it's like my favorite type of controller to go ahead and use. So those are kind of my highlights. Now, there are some downsides of this particular console too. Not anything super crazy, but there could be some things that you would look at inside of this console, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, maybe I should wait out and buy a different one, or, maybe thinking along those lines. The biggest thing and the reason, maybe one reason why I probably would tell you, hey, it might be better to kind of buy some other console or to wait out is usually because this console's already the age that it is. You might be in a situation where you might be better off to kind of, wait out until the next generation of consoles come out. So what that basically means is that right around the corner, we're probably going to end up getting the next generation of console. So I don't know when this is going to be, but the PlayStation 6 could end up coming out sooner rather than later. So that could end up being a problem that you might run into, that console might not end up, you might be seeing a successor of this console coming out way sooner rather than later. So that is kind of one thing to keep in mind there too. On top of that, when it kind of comes down to it, you're going to also have to keep in mind that when you're going through and buying something like this type of device, you're going to have to keep in mind that the other devices, they might be better, for the most part too. And because the PlayStation 5 for the most part is still available in some places, it's going to be roughly around the same price that it was when it originally came out. But luckily for us, we don't necessarily have to worry about these things like being sold out in so many places. So you do kind of have that advantage there too. But with that being said, that could just be one other problem that you might run into as well. Like, even finding them in the used market if you're wanting to go ahead and buy it. So those are kind of the big things. I think the other thing I could probably hit on too is that if you're going to go ahead and buy something like a PlayStation 5, I would hope you have a lot of PlayStation 5 games or PlayStation games in general. If you're going to go ahead and buy a PlayStation 5, I hope you understand the differences between the disc model and the digital model. Because if you're going to go through and buy one, you have to make sure that if you already have a library of PlayStation 5 games, you might be okay with something like the digital PlayStation or the digital version of the PlayStation 5. But if you do have a huge amount of PlayStation games already, it would make a lot of sense for you to go through and buy something like a PlayStation 5 with a disc tray, or that way you can go ahead and plug in all your games. You can use all your games within that particular device as well. And that will make a lot of sense to go and buy from that particular perspective too. So overall, I love the PlayStation 5. I think it's 100% still worth buying for sure. And this would definitely be one of the types of devices that I would highly recommend buying. Maybe it's not necessarily like perfect or anything like that, but I do think it's still a really good console for the most part, and it still has a bunch of value in this day and age as well. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.